What's up, fellow survivors of the apocalypse? It is I, the OGGM, your guide to all the tabletop role-playing game news, weather, sports, and general internet nonsense. It is 9 o'clock in the morning. It is the third day of February 2022. It is 55 degrees and sunny here in Ventura, California, with another high winds warning. And it's February and it's Thursday, which means because it's the month of love, we're taking a look at role-playing games I absolutely love for no specific reason other than I love them. It could be because I love the system, because I love the setting, because I love the art, because I love the emotions. There's no rhyme or reason or formula to why I love these games. A lot of these games are extremely obscure. And today we are talking about the Marrow Project, one of the very earliest post-apocalypse, realistic post-apocalypse role-playing games that came out of the Cold War of the 70s. And the reason why I love the Marrow Project, other than a lot of the technology in the Marrow Project is based upon technology that actually existed on the time. For those of you who aren't familiar with the Marrow Project tabletop role-playing game and the setting, it's basically Fallout before Fallout. A bunch of normal people are put in a suspended animation. The apocalypse happens. They come out of suspended animation, and they're tasked with trying to reclaim a post-apocalyptic Earth. But, of course, things go wrong. And why do I love this game? As I said, it's one of the very first post-apocalyptic games that ever came out that I was ever aware of. It came out sometime in the early 80s. The technology was all based upon technology existed at the time, both military and rescue and realistic, and then sort of, kit bashed, forward engineered. What would this look like, if the technology of the military and survival and rescue and stuff like that was advanced, and then there was apocalypse. But the other reason I loved it was the Mars One. One of the things the Marrow Project had was a lot of cool vehicles. One of the vehicles was the Mars One, the vehicle you see in the picture right here, which was this multi-wheeled amphibious all-terrain vehicle that was based upon the multi-wheeled all-terrain vehicle from the movie Damnation Alley and the short-lived Saturday morning cartoon Arc 1, where the Arc 1 was also from that. And why do I love this? Because when I lived in the Valley in the 1980s, I lived about 5 blocks from where the Mars One from Damnation Alley, the Landmaster from Damnation Alley, was stored back when it was in the San Fernando Valley. So I literally would see it at least once a month if I was driving south or walking south or going south for some reason. It was kept near Universal Studios, or that might have been the Arc One, or it might have been a copy. But anyways, yeah, so I fell in love with the vehicle. And then I saw the Marrow Project, and it had the vehicle, and I was like, I need to know about this game. So I had a copy. I don't know what happened to it. It was way too complicated for my 1980s brain, but there's lots of stuff that I loved in it. So the Marrow Project is a science fiction role-playing game created by Kevin Doki, Robert Sadley, and Richard Tuchsiak, Tucholka, and published by Timeline Limited. It is set after a devastating nuclear war. It was first released sometime in the early 1980s and still has a loyal following. A 4th edition was released as of December 15th, 2013. In 1974, Robert Sadler wrote the outline for a post-apocalyptic adventure story. Richard added a second chapter, and then the project was buried for a year or more. In 1975, they were introduced to role-playing, and Richard suddenly realized that the Marrow Project could be an adventure background for a role-playing game. He used Sadler's story as a guide to write the game background. The two joined forces with Kevin to flesh out the military portion of the game. After months of play testing, it was run at an early convention and was great success there. At that point, Timeline Games was born, and shortly thereafter, due to internal conflicts, several of the individuals left Timeline Games and created Tacky Tack Games, which later became TriTac Games. In 2012, after several years of development, a Kickstarter campaign was run to provide the funds to finish the 4th edition. Okay, so yes. And then we had the setting of the world And of course, it was highly received well because, we had Damnation Alley, which basically was the Landmaster, and the Landmaster was the Mars One. So the game is set in the future. It, sets the idea of basically it's Fallout. A bunch of individuals are hidden in bunkers where they are frozen or placed in suspended animation. And then when the demolition happens, the whatever computer is programmed to wake them up after a certain amount of time once it detects that the outside is safe. There was supposed to be a central command post, and from which these special operation semi-military, semi-rescue units would go out and try and reclaim the world, help the survivors, re-educate, typical idea. But of course, things go wrong. 150 years after the Third World War, the members of the Marrow Project wake up longer than they were supposed to. Instead of being part of an organized plan to rebuild the civilization, that find themselves isolated in a world where the war was only a distant legend. The people are ignorant and anything but struggle, and all they do is struggle to survive with strange mutated animals that haunt their footsteps. So at the beginning of Mutants 2, one of the scenarios, of course, was the scenario that I played in college when we played the Marrow Project was same basic idea. Everybody got to make these, kick-ass special forces, top-tier characters, the Rambos, the Sarah Connors, the James Bonds, the SF, the Navy SEAL type, just, the type of characters that would be amazingly appropriate to survive in that type of world. They're placed in suspended animation. The computer fails to wake them up when it's supposed to, and 100 more years pass, and they all die in suspended animation, which pissed off everybody at the table because they'd just spent 20, 30 minutes making these kick-ass, state-of-the-art, top-tier characters, and then the DM says, oh, they all died. You're playing the support crew, the other guys. You're playing the janitors, the electricians, the plumbers, the doctors, the nurses, the other people that were frozen to support these people. They're all dead. Now you've got, Joe the construction worker, Susan the plumber, Stephen the doctor, who are filled in this bunker filled with all this military equipment and state-of-the-art equipment and survival gear, most of which they have no training in how to use other than the basic training they would have received. And they've got to go out into a nuclear war, devastated world. And oh, by the way, the computer malfunctioned, and it's 100 years longer than it was supposed to wake you up. So great scenario. I don't remember much about the system other than it was kind of complicated, kind of chunky. And it didn't really work with my mind at the time. And there were other post-apocalypse games out like Aftermath that we also played. And we played a lot of Aftermath when I was in college in the 80s. Yeah. But I didn't love the game for the math. I didn't love the game for the system. I didn't love the game for the setting. Although at the time, we wore, if you're talking late 70s, early 80s, we were growing up in that time where a very real fear hanging over everybody's head was the Cold War, the Nuclear War, the what if the apocalypse happened. We still had Fallout warnings at school, duck and cover. There were still air raid warnings that would go off randomly in the late 70s, early 80s where I lived. It was, and to remind you that at any time this could happen. We lived in the fear of Mad Max and war games actually happening. So, of course, making a role-playing game with the idea that, oh, it does happen and you're playing the survivors, or it did happen and you're playing people that were placed in cryogenic frozen suspended animation and who wake up with the goal to survive in this Mad Max post-apocalypse mutant animal world. So yeah, obviously it was, again, it's kind of something you were there, had to be there. But like I said, what I loved about it was the descriptions. They really got into the descriptions of all the equipment, all the gear, all the bases, and of course the vehicles. And of course the Landmaster, the Mars One, from Damnation Alley. Link to Damnation Alley down below, which of course I said, I lived in the valley, so I lived near these places that did the car customization for a lot of the movies. I lived near the guy whose shop built the Batmobile and the Aston Martin from James Bond and, the Monkeys Mobile and the Munsters hearse car. These were all shops that were relatively in the Studio City, North Hollywood, Universal City area. So it was not unusual to see these iconic vehicles on display. And the vehicle that I think was the Mars One, though it might have been the Arc One, or it just might have been a kit bashed, was right at the top of the hill as you drove down towards Universal City, Universal Studios, and you crossed over into Los Angeles. There was this big lot that had some movie prop cars that were on display, I guess, to get people to, go, hey, we have these on display at Universal or whatever. And one of them was the Mars One, the Landmaster, the Arc One, or a kit bashed hobby version of the Mars One. I don't know if it was exactly the Landmaster. It does say in the Landmaster, wiki that it was on display in the valley, and one's on display in different places, and it's still on display somewhere in Central California. So yeah, it wasn't unusual to see these vehicles. So if you're a kid like me and you love toys and you love G.I. Joe and you love Hot Wheels and you love early Star Wars figures and you love the Japanese anime robots and you've lived within walking distance, of course I fell in love with it. And when I saw a game that had this and had these guns and all this technology that was just cool, frightening but cool, I wanted it. So I had a copy. I don't know what happened to it. It probably got destroyed either when my garage flooded, when our house got flooded, when we lived in Studio City and the floods happened, because back then there were still enough rain that we had floods, or it was in my parents' attic and with a lot of my other gaming stuff that I had, and it burnt up in the Thompson fires of 2018. Either way, I don't have my copy. I've always been looking to replace my copy, but of course, if you find a copy online, it's outrageously expensive just because it's such an obscure game and has a diehard following. And yeah, the Landmaster, the Mars One. So that's why I love this game. The setting's cool. I mean, really, nobody actually wants to post-apocalypse, but we were growing up in the time when the fear of that Mad Max damnation apocalypse was going to happen. We were still having Fallout drills and air raid sirens going off. So it was ingrained into our psyche of the late 70s, early 80s. And yeah, who wouldn't want to drive the Mars One? I mean, it's just a fucking cool G.I. Joe Thunderbirds are go vehicle. Yeah. So that's why I love this game. And again, it makes no sense. But this is February, so we're talking about games I absolutely love for no other reason than I love them. And we're talking about the Marrow Project. If you can find a copy, great. If you have a copy, way to go, man. If you know where I can find a copy for a reasonably priced, even if it's a PDF or a photocopy, great. I will post the link to the Landmaster down below so you can see where it is currently. Again, I don't actually know what vehicle it was that was there on display. It might have been the Landmaster. It might have been the Arc One, or it might have just been a kit bash combination based upon the idea that was just on display to get people to go to Universal Studios, because it was literally across the street from one of the entrances into Universal Studios at the time. And, I lived within walking distance, technically, of the place where the Batmobile was on display. So, I mean, growing up in the San Fernando Valley in the 70s and 80s, you saw this shit all the time. And it was just like, whoa, cool! That's the Batmobile! Anyways, I'm the OGGM. If you appreciate these loving retro respects of obscure games, let me know. If you don't want to hear me talk about this topic ever again, let me know. If you haven't subscribed yet, please subscribe. Help me hit 1,000 subs by August 4th, and we'll do something crazy. Till then, I hope you survive the apocalypse and get out of my stasis tube, you damn kids with your damn apocalypse.